Open the podcast bay door as hell.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 137 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. As promised in the last two episodes, we've got a special Halloween deep dive for you, where I'm discussing the Disney Plus special presentation, Werewolf by Night. My guest this time is someone who actually might know more about the subject than I did coming in, as he's a longtime Werewolf by Night and Man-Thing fan, as well as being a fan of the classic Universal Monster and Hammer horror movies. He goes by Michael V, and I think you'll agree that he's a great guest with a lot of thoughtful takes on the show. Before we get started on that, however, I need to send a thank you to all of my patrons. Justin Bailey, Jesse Clark, Lily Breen, Ricky Garvin, Rob Garrison, Aaron Woodward, Aaron Borst, Carla Hoffman, Lyndon Onstead, Julio Herrera, and Matthew Saint are so greatly appreciated. And if you'd like to join in supporting the show, it's just $1 per month to get extra audio, full scripts of the pre-written episodes, and this monthly shoutout. Now, we start with our introduction to my guest, as I asked Michael how it is he became a citizen of Geektown. How did you come to Geektown? What is your origin story for how you became a geek, and of what subjects?
Wow. Ooh. Well, my dad was a geek. I guess we could start there. My dad was, he was like an original madman from the show Mad Men. He was an old school ad exec, and he started in comics. He was a comic illustrator. He worked for both Marvel and DC on a freelance basis. He worked for Archie Comics. He published a few things on his own, and then went into advertising because there was no money to be made at the time in comics. And so I was always around that. I was always in that world from the day I was born. I was raised on Universal horror movies and Hammer horror movies and things like that. Like when other kids were going to Little League games, my dad was taking me to comic book conventions, and I went to and I promise this is not, I'm not trying to sound like I'm bragging or anything, but I went to as a kid, I went to the red carpet premiere of Star Wars in New York City.
Oh, nice.
And I remember wearing a tuxedo and following Chewbacca into the theater. So I grew up in New York City, and there was a very, I think it's still there to some extent, but there was a very large comic book and science fiction shop called Forbidden Planet. At the time, it was 2 stories, and I think over the years it had dwindled down to like 1 story, and then eventually it just became sort of a storefront. So if it's still in existence, it's probably a fraction of what it used to be. But anyway, it was like the go-to place that you went for anything: comic books and horror books and yeah, VHS tapes and eventually DVDs and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we used to go there constantly. And then right next door to it was the Strand bookstore, which is a very famous bookstore in New York. And as a kid, I remember my dad, Divine, the actor Divine, was in the bookstore, but not as Divine. He was just as himself. And he was just shopping for books. My dad introduced me to him, and I was like 8 years old or something like that. And he's, oh, this is Divine. And I didn't know who Divine was. He looked like Mickey Rooney, as far as I can tell. So, I mean, the point is that I grew up in this world. This is just who, this was always the norm for me.
Excellent. And now you said you grew up on Hammer horror and the Universal monsters and all of that. And you did mention that your dad was a comic book illustrator, but What about comics specifically? What were your interests there and what are they today?
So, like any kid, I kind of grew up with like, your standard things. There were always Batman comics, always. Every sort of iteration of Batman, there were always Batman comics. There was always Superman comics. My dad was a big he loved the Flash, he loved Wonder Woman. He loved Batman and Superman, but he gravitated towards some of the smaller books, some of the characters that didn't get quite the amount of attention.
Yeah, as the world's biggest speedball fan, I understand that.
Yeah. And so as I got older, and when I say older, I mean, like 7 and 8, when I started to develop my own taste in books, I gravitated more towards the supernatural characters than anything else. To this day, I remain the biggest Ghost Rider fan ever. I still have the original 1 through 81, which was the original
Mhm.
run of the Johnny Blaze character. I still have them all. It's the only comic book series that I still have the original set that I bought along the way, polybagged and cardboard backed. And when they brought the character back again with the Danny Ketch character, I was like, I don't need any of that. I became a grumpy old man at the age of like 14. I was like, I'm a just Danny Ketch guy. But so I gravitated towards those characters. In terms of DC, I was always a Marvel kid. I liked Marvel more than DC. And I think I never really put two and two together as to why. And then I heard an interview with Stan Lee not long ago. I actually heard the interview after he passed away, where he had mentioned that Marvel characters they had real world problems. Whereas DC
Right.
characters were always fighting some extraterrestrial something or other. And, Peter Parker was battling, bullies in high school. So I think maybe that's kind of, even though I say that being the biggest Ghost Rider fan, and there's absolutely nothing real about that character, but I think that's why I always preferred Marvel comics. But in terms of DC, again, I always went towards the supernatural way. I like the character Deadman. There was a character, I liked the character of Lobo. I was a big Lobo fan when he first came out, but for me, that was sort of a more of a zeitgeist kind of experience. I was a heavy metal teenager, and here was this character
Yeah.
of Lobo, and he speaks directly to me, that kind of thing. And so, but today, I'll be honest with you, it's very hard for me to get excited about any one particular comic book. I still read them. I don't get the level of excitement that I used to. I kind of feel like I read them almost out of a sense of obligation. And I think it's partly because I feel at the time, I felt like I belonged to this very small, very specific club, the comic book kids, the movie nerds, the things like that.
Yeah.
And then this has become mainstream, very, very, very much so mainstream. And I think it's a combination of me just getting older and, having to pay a mortgage, things like that, where real life sort of filtered in. And partly maybe because it didn't feel as special to me anymore. And this is not to deride the culture at all. I'm glad that these things became. It excites me when I see characters on screen now that in a million years I never thought I would be able to look at, turn on Disney Plus and see a character that I had books of back when I was a kid. Never in a
Yeah.
million years did I think I would see something like this. And so I'm not deriding the culture. I just think for me it kind of took almost a back seat. And that's not to say I lost my geek cred at all, because to this day, I still believe in Bigfoot. So, I'm not.
Well,
So,
then you're in the wrong state. You come over here to Oregon. There's a bunch of.
now, I swear to you, this is true. Years ago, I started riding motorcycles, and I got very, very big into riding motorcycles. And I started taking these road trips where I would fly into a state. I'd fly in, I'd rent a motorcycle, and then I'd spend about 6 or 7 days on the road, just driving around, just getting to see
Mhm.
places that I wouldn't normally have the chance or any real reason to go see. So, like, for instance, I went to go see Devil's Tower because of Close Encounters, and I wanted to see it from a motorcycle, from the perspective of a motorcycle.
Mhm.
Now, my dream motorcycle road trip, and I will make this happen one day. As sure as I'm speaking to you now, I'm going to make this happen. I want to fly into Portland, Oregon. I want to ride up to Astoria, Oregon, to see the Goonies house, and then I want to ride
Yeah.
down the coast to Willow Creek, California, so that I can see where the famous Patterson-Gimlin Bigfoot film was shot. That's the whole point of the trip, just to drive down the coast,
Okay.
see the Goonies house, see the Sasquatch site, and then fly home. And I'll make it happen. I just, I have to kind of get the time.
All right. Well, why don't we get started talking about the show?
Yeah, let's do it.
That we're here to discuss. And the homages begin immediately,
right out of the
with
gate,
the Marvel Studios special presentation logo, which is half CBS special presentation, half HBO feature presentation. Yep. Those logos that we saw as a kid. For me, the CBS presentation was always followed by a Peanuts special.
Absolutely.
One of the Peanuts cartoons.
Absolutely. Yep.
And then that HBO one was so well done that they actually made a behind the scenes featurette on it that would show on HBO. I had somehow gotten HBO and Showtime for free when I was a kid. When we first got cable, it was just a mistake on their part that my parents never corrected. And so I would see that HBO feature presentation all the time.
Same thing. The second that came on screen, I knew that this was going to be something special.
Yeah.
I knew that care had been involved in this production. Somebody was paying attention.
Exactly. And then we get into the Marvel fanfare. But immediately it becomes a little twisted with the claw marks and the music going darker and into a minor key, and then turns black and white. We start seeing the grain on the film. They really wanted to put us into that classic horror mood by adding all of those little touches. You could hear a little bit of the hiss on the soundtrack, which, not having grown up in that time, I wonder how much of that hiss is an artifact of age and how much of it was there when it originally aired.
Obviously, it's impossible to know unless you speak to somebody who watched these movies in a theater, on a big screen. If you sat down in, the 30s, and watched Frankenstein on a big screen, who knows what it would have been like. I have a feeling that it might be a combination of things. I'm sure the technology was obviously not as refined.
Well, obviously,
and so
yeah.
it was probably part of that film process. I think people were just so enamored with the technology at the time that little things like that never even crossed their mind. Pop, a hiss, a scratch, up until, and this, speaking to the attention to detail, they even included the film reel change.
Yes, I was going to bring that up the first time it came up. The cigarette burns.
The cigarette burns, exactly, which most people never even realize that you've seen movies where that has happened, because when they started to transfer film to digital, film to videotape, those cigarette burns appeared on VHS tapes, even though there was obviously no need for it. There was no point where there was no thought to take them out. And so the cigarette burns, for those listening who don't know, up in the upper right-hand corner, for a couple of frames, there would be what looked like a cigarette burn on the film strip. It was an indication. It was to tell the projectionist, get ready to change reels from one film to the next, because it didn't all, you had two projectors in a projection booth. This is all a lost art form. This is not done at all anymore. But the fact that they saw fit to include that in Werewolf by Night, I thought was a really cute little homage to just that lost art of filmmaking.
Yeah, I agree. I'm one of those people who always saw that cigarette burn and knew, I know the scene is about to change, because we're getting a new reel. And it's funny because some of those movies will have a very brief audio cue as well. There's a little beep at the second burn, because they do one to warn you and then one right as right at the end, right when the reel changes. And the one with the reel change would sometimes have this little beep, and every time I would hear it, and it would take me out for just that brief second. But I love that they include it here to really make it feel like this is a movie from the 50s that just happened to be unearthed today.
Yep. Yeah.
Kind of the movie equivalent of, I don't know how familiar you are with the Sentry, the Marvel Comics character.
Yep, sure. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Where they put out an article in Wizard magazine like, hey, we discovered this character from the vaults that had never been published before, and made it a whole thing to make it seem like something that had been unearthed from the past. So yeah, all these little touches to make it feel like genuine 50s or earlier storytelling is great. And then we go into the actual film itself with the narrator and this animated / book intro, and we see the Avengers in silhouette, and those are the heroes and the Marvels. But then we have the monsters.
I know it being obviously a Marvel production, they had to sneak something in there that would, some connection to the bigger universe. But I'm glad that that's all it was. I'm glad it started and stopped right there, because there was chatter online that this was tying into the Loki series through certain characters and certain actions, and I was happy that it never did that.
The other rumor I heard was that Blade was going to show up or tie in somehow. And this is very much its own story, and I think they made the right choice in not trying to tie it in or make it the kind of thing where you had to watch A, B, and C before you could understand what was happening here.
Yeah.
This is, if you're into that classic horror but don't know Marvel at all, that doesn't matter. You don't need any background at all. There are, of course, the tidbits thrown in for those of us who are familiar with the material, but to get the main story and to appreciate the show on its own, you don't need to be completely immersed in the MCU.
Exactly. And to that point, the thing that I liked the most about this, or not the most, but one of the things that I really appreciated about this, and I have to give you a little bit of a backstory to this. Before this came out, have you watched the Munsters remake, Rob Zombie's Munsters remake?
I have not watched that yet.
Okay.
No.
Well, you're ahead of the curve. I don't recommend watching it. And the reason
I've heard poor reviews. Yeah.
Well, so what had happened was, and this is just a very quick personal story. I have a couple of good friends that were very, very excited for the Munsters remake to come out. And to say I was hesitant is an understatement. I don't think that Rob Zombie is a competent filmmaker at all. I think he just throws a lot of things, up in the air, and he hopes something lands, but it's just a constant barrage of nothing until you reach the end credits. And again, that's just my opinion of it. I'm not trying to persuade anybody one way or the other. However, I knew that these two, the Munsters and Werewolf by Night, were coming out close to one another.
And close to Halloween, because
and close to Halloween, exactly. And a very good friend of mine was very excited for the Munsters, and I was very excited for Werewolf by Night, and we were just sort of ribbing one another about it, because he didn't care about my thing, I didn't really care about his thing, and we were both just making fun of one another. And then when the Munsters came out, and it was every bit as awful as I had told him it was going to be, and again, that's just my opinion, and I said, just wait until this thing comes out, Werewolf by Night, and I guarantee you'll see something that a lesser filmmaker could never manage. And the comparison afterwards that I had, or what I was trying to explain to him was, and I say this to everyone, Werewolf by Night gives you exactly what you need to tell that story without giving you anything else. It lets you fill in all the blanks that it doesn't provide you with. It could have very easily been the other way if it were handed to, if somebody less I don't want to say talented and I don't want to say competent, but somebody with less of a vision. Let's say that.
Okay.
We're handling the same material. So, there is the scene in there and this is just an example. There's the scene in there in the opening scene where the hunters have gathered in the room and they're looking against the wall and they see all the trophies.
Mm-hmm.
There's no information provided to you about this. You're not bogged down. At no point does any character bog you down with exposition just to fill you in on where we are plot wise or story wise or in any capacity. Not only is it a self-contained show, but it's very, very small in its scope, but it accomplishes so much with so little. It gives you just what you need in order to make the connections yourself. And that's the type of storytelling that I really, really appreciate. And it's also very rare for Marvel because they're trying to tell these epic scope stories with all of these characters and all of these threads that are trying to come together. And so to see a studio like Marvel put out something this small and this contained, and to see a director take that material and even strip it down further, but still tell a complete story was really, I mean, it was a very refreshing thing to just watch. Forget about the material. You don't even, let's say you're not a fan of horror movies or you know nothing about the character. From a storytelling perspective, it's genius. I mean, it is really, really well done. There was a lot of care and a lot of thought into what should and should not be told to the audience. And some people might think that's a fault in the storytelling. So maybe some people want more information, but for me, I just don't think it was necessary. I think it gave you exactly what you needed.
Yeah, you didn't need a big conversation of, oh, look, there's the Sasquatch on the wall. I remember when Ulysses and I went down to Oregon and hunted that.
Exactly. You didn't, yeah. I mean, the character of Ulysses Bloodstone has a really long, involved history in Marvel Comics. At no point was any of that even mentioned. You did not need any of that for the story. I cannot. The one thing that bothers me most of all about any movie is when there's an exposition dump. When you have a character that is specifically put in place for the sole purpose of telling the audience what's happening, it drives me insane because I don't like being force fed anything, and I don't. It's just not. It's never necessary. And So the short version of this is just I appreciated that they didn't do that with this movie.
Yeah. But as you mentioned, Ulysses Bloodstone does have a rich backstory and a very complex backstory from the comics. Mm-hmm. And since we're seeing him in the book at this moment, why don't we talk a little bit about that comic book history just to fill in those who are curious. As I understand it, Ulysses Bloodstone was a caveman originally. He was not quite a Neanderthal, but an ancient Homo sapien who had been kept alive for thousands of years due to the combination of the magic of the Bloodstone and basically some sort of deal with a demon that had brought the Bloodstone to Earth.
Yeah. This is one of those things where I know the backstory. I should have reread some of these things because that all sounds very, very familiar, and I'm sure that's what it is. I'm trying to remember the first time I saw that character and what the book was and why he was even in there. But it's funny. He's just one of those reoccurring characters that shows up in like all the books that I used to collect. And yeah, I think he did start. He was a caveman, right? Like that was the actual backstory of him. Yeah. Yeah, and you get none of that information in the show.
No, not at all. If they want to change his origin completely, if we get a future story with Elsa and she talks about her father, she doesn't have to bring any of that in. It's kind of a heroic Vandal Savage, it feels like. The stories seem kind of similar in this ancient man who, due to a meteor crashing on Earth, which is what the Bloodstone was contained in, suddenly gained immortality, or at least a very long life. Ulysses in the comics is also dead, and Elsa has taken over. But so Ulysses is dead. That's our opening incident. We know that Ulysses is dead, and so famous monster hunters are coming together to figure out who will inherit the Bloodstone. And I love how the narration is continuing in this part, and we get that final line of "Woe to the monster who finds themselves among them" as the door raises and we see Jack for the very first time.
Yeah.
Just a subtle hint of what
Now,
of what we know about what we learn about Jack.
Now, let me ask you a question, because this has been running back and forth. There have been questions about this.
Sure.
And I'm not trying to jump ahead, but why do you think Jack was there? I guess the question is he supposed to be somebody else? Did he take somebody else's identity in order to get into this, get an invitation there? Like, how did he get an invite to this event?
So there's two possibilities, I think. Either the one you just mentioned is certainly a possibility, that he took somebody's identity, that he found someone else who was a hunter and took their invitation. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I thought of is similar to X Factor, the original X Factor comics, where he is, to the outside world, to other hunters, he is a hunter. That's how he presents himself. But he is secretly helping these monsters and then claiming that they have been killed or captured or whatever to the people that he's talking to. So he has the reputation of this great hunter, but he's actually secretly on the side of the monsters.
Okay, yeah, because Verussa, mentions his kill count when she's introducing people, and saying that he has over 100. And so I'm wondering what those kills are, what they really are, or who they actually belong to. So I thought that was and again, this is part and parcel for that, not giving you all the information and letting you put things together,
fill in those gaps.
So I thought that was a cute little, an open question that I thought maybe, if they were to continue this character, and I'm sure they will, just an avenue to continue exploring.
Yeah, I would love to have this be a regular Halloween tradition.
Oh, yeah.
With Jack and Man-Thing going from adventure to adventure.
Oh, I as soon as this was over, I said they need to put these characters together and just do you know the old Road to movies, like Road to Bali? And
yeah.
Just
the Bob Hope.
Yeah, just do that with these two characters. I don't care what you put them on the road and I will follow them no matter what it is they do.
Road to Wundagore.
I am fine with that. I am 100% on board for all of that.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. And we get this nice touch in this moment where Jack first walks in, where we see the bloodstone, and it's the only thing that is in color for almost the entire show, is that bright red, and it just draws your eye in and says, this is magic.
Yeah.
And then of the non-heroic hunters, we meet my favorite here, which is Jovan.
Yep.
Played wonderfully by Kirk Thatcher, who is, for most people, he is probably best known as the subway punk in Star Trek 4.
Yeah, he's also an accomplished puppeteer.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, the guy's credits are actually pretty amazing, and to find him in this role. But yeah, Kirk, one of the, I'd say he's the main hunter besides Jack, because he does get the most sort of screen time and the most development.
Yeah.
Accomplished puppeteer. How about that?
Yeah, and not his first appearance in the MCU either.
Oh, no? What was he in before?
He was in Spider-Man Homecoming.
Really?
Yes. He shows up in Spider-Man Homecoming just as Punk on Street.
Wow.
So it's a brief blink and you'll miss it. He's like standing next to a newsstand in New York and cheering on Spider-Man. I think he's the one who's like, do a flip, or something like that.
So he has played Punk on Bus and Punk on Street.
Yes. Yes.
That's great.
And now Punk with axe.
That is hysterical. That is really, really funny.
So yeah, the Jovan, we have the other hunters here. I was really surprised that none of these other characters were Easter eggs from the Marvel Comics.
Yeah, they were. I mean, they were. This is the Werewolf by, and not to give away anything again, but this is the Werewolf by Night equivalent of the Chitauri army from Avengers. They're mostly disposable. They're there to create an environment and eventually just end up as fodder. But even with that though, I'm glad that they gave them all. I mean, I can't really say that they gave them specific personalities because we don't really spend that much time with them, but they did spend time crafting looks for them, which I thought was important. I mean, because the entire thing is an hour long, so there's not a whole lot of time to develop. You can't possibly develop everything that you'd like to.
Exactly.
And so the fact that they did spend time giving their specific looks and hiring actors and actresses that had very distinctive looks to themselves. The woman that played Azrael, long, skinny, very slender, very angular features.
Yes.
She's an actress. I can't remember her name.
Eugenie Bondurant.
Okay. Yes. She, I believe she was a fashion model, or she's done modeling. She's also an actress, but just on her own, just a very striking looking woman. I mean, very recognizable, very memorable. And so I thought that was, they didn't just hire anybody. They went for a look, and they, even what's her name? Harriet Harris, that plays Verussa. This is not a woman that she doesn't have classic Hollywood looks, but she's absolutely perfect in this role.
Oh, absolutely. She is perfect as the harsh mother-in-law or stepmother, I guess is probably stepmother.
Yeah. And admittedly, I don't know what her list of credits are, but.
Well, I know her best as Frasier's agent, Bebe, in the Frasier television show.
Is that the same actress?
It is the same actress.
Oh my God. That's so funny. I didn't realize that was her.
Yeah.
And now that I'm thinking of the character, I'm like, how did I not realize it was her? Wow, that's amazing. Okay, that's really something. I thought
that's a great range that she can go from something as comedic as that to this very harsh, demanding woman who's
I thought, for the limited. Again, everybody has limited time. I mean, even the main character, even Jack Russell, has limited screen time on this, but they do, the most with what they're given. It doesn't seem like anything is wasted, and it doesn't seem like, for the most part, any performances are wasted. These mostly unknown actors and actresses are really just spot on in their performances. They are truly, this thing, in my opinion, is perfectly cast.
Yeah.
At no point would I ever think, if I'm looking for Monster Hunter, I'm like, I would never go with, that guy that with the puppets. Yeah, let's get him in here. And so, it's really, truly well done.
Yeah. Now, it's funny. You just said our main character is Jack. I would argue our main character is Elsa.
Well, yeah.
I know that the show is called Werewolf by Night, but most of the monster movies, the title is the monster, but that's not our main character.
No, well, I mean, I guess it depends on what your definition of main character is, whether it's the person that's driving the plot forward
protagonist.
Or the protagonist, right? Those can be different things, and they can also be interchangeable depending on who the director is and who's telling the story and how the narrative is working.
Right.
A perfect example of that is who is the main character in Pulp Fiction. You have this nonlinear narrative that's interwoven without an actual protagonist. It just depends on who's telling the story at the time. And so I would say that Elsa is definitely the main character because the story doesn't necessarily work without her, is one way to look at it. She is actually the one that's more or less propelling things forward. And the Jack quest almost becomes like the side quest. It becomes the side story. And that's perfectly fine. It doesn't do anything to diminish what's happening on screen.
Yeah. Well, we get our introduction to Elsa here. And so let's bring up her Marvel history in the comics. Now, if you're not as into the comics as you were when you were younger, so you may have missed most of her stories because she's only 20 years old. She's only been around since 2001.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the character, and I've come across her maybe a handful of times, but I don't have an extensive knowledge of her backstory at all.
So she is the daughter of Ulysses Bloodstone, and she first appeared in Bloodstone #1, which was by Abnett and Lanning as the writers and Michael Lopez, but she's portrayed very different in that first story from how we see her in most of her appearances. So really, I'd say her first characterization that we come to know is how she appears in the book Next Wave, drawn by Stuart Immonen.
Yeah, lots of orange, if I'm correct.
Yes, yeah. A big orange trench coat and a shotgun, and constantly talks in... Oh, shoot, I've forgotten there is a technical term for them, but the bleeped out curses in in comics. The asterisk, hashtag, @ . So she is a foul-mouthed monster hunter who has a bit of the Bloodstone in her. So she does have some powers, but nowhere near the level that her father had. So she has to rely on her fighting skills and her weapons much more. And she seems very similarly portrayed here. She doesn't get that many curses out because this is still a Disney Plus show that I don't think was TVMA. I think it was TV PG.
Yeah, I think it was TV PG. I was wondering how much of a casting influence Kristen Ritter and Jessica Jones was to this character.
I had the same thought. I mean, the first time I saw the trailer, I was like, Jessica Jones is in this?
Yeah. I mean, they had to have known that the portrayal was going to be very, very similar, and the actresses have a
similar look.
Yeah, they have a similar look. I don't think it's bad. I was just wondering if that was intentional or they just sort of rolled with it.
I think they just went with who they thought was best for the role.
Yeah.
You know, if they had ever mentioned it in the show, if they had made some sort of reference to Jessica, then I might think they would have done it on purpose. But I think it's just coincidence that these two kind of have similar facial structures.
Yeah.
And just happen to be the best actress for that particular role.
Yeah. And to that end, it's just that the character, in the books has a very distinctive look. It is a lot of orange and a lot of, the trench coat and the shotguns and things like that. And so it doesn't seem that they've incorporated any of that. They just kind of did their own thing, which is fine, because I think the character that they did put into the show works in the sense of the show. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
So, you know, she's not a monster hunter, and having her not look like the other monster hunters makes sense.
Yeah. And here we get to find out that Elsa's relationship with her father and stepmother is very strained.
To say the least.
Yeah. And like you said, it's not really an exposition dump here, but it's done in character moments. You know, we learn all of this through real interactions between characters. It doesn't feel like one person is saying to the other, here is our history that I have to tell you, even though you already know it, because the audience needs to learn this.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it's all done in very human conversation.
Exactly. And that's to the credit of the director and to the point of them giving you exactly what you want, because this show comes with a narrator. You know, there is an actual narrator narrating the opening, and it could have been simple for him to say, Elsa comes home after being estranged for many years and didn't care about that. You know, there could have just been all of that right at the beginning, setting the audience up, and you could have just done away with that whole interaction and given more time to the monsters, but they chose not to. And it is to their credit that they didn't go that way. They, in my opinion, they went about it very smartly. They took the right roads to tell you that story, which I thought was important. In the hands of a lesser director, that's not how that would have went.
And we should also credit the writers
Yes.
as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
On this.
Yeah.
That a lot of that is in their hands.
Mm-hmm.
So Heather Quinn and Peter Cameron, who wrote the teleplay, should get the credit there for doing that and for, bringing in the narrator, telling us what we absolutely need to know, and then going away from that, abandoning the narrator and letting the story unfold for itself.
Yep. Very much so.
And let's get into the actual funeral here, which is probably where the most humor comes into the show. There's always going to be a little bit of that Marvel humor in every project they do. And I loved Elsa dragging the chair across as Verussa began her speech. Just that passive aggressive dismissal of her stepmother.
It's very reminiscent of the scene in Men in Black when Agent J does the same thing.
Oh yeah. I had forgotten about that, but yes, thank you for reminding me.
Upsetting, sort of that. It's actually almost a form of breaking the fourth wall, where you're literally cutting into the action with this outside thing. Yeah, it's great. It was a great little scene.
And what did you think of the reveal of Ulysses?
I think I need to arrange something similar to happen at my funeral. That's that's exactly what I thought. I said, I gotta figure out how to make this happen for real. I thought it was great. The only problem I had with it was that they had given that away in the trailer. So you knew that was coming. I thought that would have been a great thing to hide, but I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was it added that necessary sort of macabre tone to the show that, because you're doing this homage to the Universal and Hammer horror movies. I thought that was great, but it was also done very tongue in cheek.
Yeah, I felt it was a little bit of also an homage to kind of the EC comics with like the Crypt Keeper,
very much so.
The witches and all of those hosts of those horror comics. So that was a nice touch, a little bit of a double homage there. And he even gets one Crypt Keeper-esque pun in at the very end. Because he'll be rotting for you.
I thought that was, and again, I was kind of a little dismayed that line had made it into the trailer, but it was still great to see in context.
Yes.
I mean? I really thought it was well done. I liked that, they went for a decayed sort of crypty look. It wasn't this fresh looking corpse. It had clearly been sitting around for a little bit, and they didn't. I think had this been in color, I don't think they would have been able to get away with as much as they did. I think because it was in black and white, they were actually able to get away with a lot more.
I actually read an interview with Michael Giacchino that said basically that.
Okay.
He thinks that part of the reason that they were able to get the rating that they did was because it was done in black and white. And so, you didn't have like the bright red blood spurts.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because towards the end there are, you have that blood splatter that hits the camera. That would have been a lot more grisly. But in terms of Ulysses Bloodstone, I thought it was really well done. Again, it's just one of these things that, being sort of a film nerd, you can see how this could have gone the other way. You can kind of pick out these moments where that was really well done. And had they maybe not angled it correctly, or had they not framed the shot, it would not have elicited the same response. And you could tell what they were going for. They wanted to keep it light while introducing these more grisly elements. And it was smart. It's definitely smart filmmaking.
Yeah. Well, and then we move on from the wake or funeral or whatever you want to call that to the hunt, where the inheritor of the Bloodstone will be decided. And the atmosphere for this hunt, with the flaming tuba player escorting Jack into the maze, it's these beautiful little touches that just make it feel so unique, but at the same time, it felt very of the 30s or 40s, of that classic horror I'm not sure exactly what made me feel that, why the flaming tuba made me feel that, but it did.
Well, because
Is there anything specific that was being homaged there, or
I don't know if there's one specific thing that they are calling towards, that they're trying to lay in a little bit of an Easter egg. But it's interesting that you say that, because this story takes place in the present day. It is a present day
yeah,
adventure. However, all of the little things that they put into the background, and all the little things that they almost in a hazy way let you in on, keep you entrenched in, call it a bygone era. They're not specifically trying to tell you that, like, oh, this is from the 50s and this is from the 40s and this is from 1932 and this is even from the 1800s. It's almost an immersive experience. They want you to feel secure in this past timeline while keeping everything happening present day. And it's really smart filmmaking that they don't reveal a lot. I mean, obviously you're aware that this is present day, but they don't really reveal a lot of that until the very last shot of the movie.
yeah,
Where you see things that are current. And that, again, this is all by design. This appeared on storyboards when this was being put together.
mm-hmm.
They never wanted you to leave that time until it was time for you to leave. And they
no one ever pulls out a cell phone.
Exactly. They literally walk you right into the present day, and it's incredibly well done. In terms of the flaming tuba player, I can't specifically speak to anything that happened specifically like that, but the costuming, the cadence, even the way it was shot, just very reminiscent of, I mean, you can pick a decade. You can go from 30s to 60s and find something that would fit that bill. But yeah, just really. And I like that there's no context for this. Like, it's not like, and now we're going to light the ceremonial tuba and we're going to march you in. It's just, it's just
there. It is
just there. And it's funny. The thing I thought of as soon as I saw that was the flaming guitar player from Mad Max Fury Road, because again, no context whatsoever, but it works beautifully in the scene. Here's this guy that's strapped to this truck and he's playing this flaming guitar, and yeah, I guess it makes sense. Why not? And that's exactly, that's exactly what I thought. Yeah. Okay. He's being marched into the cemetery, or, flaming tuba. Sure. Why not?
Sure. And then Jack passes two guards on the way into the maze. I think probably my only moment where I went out of the story for a second and I was like, well, what are they gonna do if the monster tries to escape? If four professional hunters are going to try to take this thing down, and it's very possible that one or more of those guys are going to die from this, what are two guys in body armor going to do against the man-thing? What was the plan there?
I don't know why they had, way back when, I don't know why they had only two Gamorrean guards guarding the Rancor in Return of the Jedi. Like, what was their plan? What were they going to do?
Find the trainer.
Yeah, I guess. I can't imagine two pig monsters being up against a Rancor doing anything. But whatever they're getting paid, it certainly isn't enough. I can tell you that much. I'd like to know how they captured the man-thing to begin with. Who took that on?
It had to be someone like Daredevil, because you have to be without fear.
Exactly, yeah, I thought that was...
that is a piece of plot they don't fill in for us, and just kind of have to assume that probably some sort of platoon of men.
Yeah.
Quantity rather than quality.
I would have to assume
in order to bring him down.
Yep. I agree.
And all of these scenes in the maze, the suspense that they keep up through this entire sequence is just brilliant. We get that jump scare of Elsa and Jack finding each other, and Jack's like, hey, let's just pass each other by. We're all good. But then Jovan shows up immediately and starts attacking
Yep.
And Jack just takes off. He's like, this is all you, Elsa. Good luck.
Yeah. Well, he makes a point of saying later on, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but he makes a point of saying that he's not the monster.
He's not that kind of hunter.
He's not that kind of hunter. He's not that guy. He's not the monster, and the monster isn't him. I thought that was just an interesting little character trait. And he's just like, nope, I'm out. See ya. And he takes off. And we find out how skilled Elsa really is.
Oh, yeah. She's definitely more than holds her own here, because she ends up with Jovan's axe and leaps up over the wall and escapes.
Yeah. These are important little character development pieces, because she is also not interested in killing anyone. That's not why she's there. She wants the Bloodstone and she wants to leave. Period. The end. She's not in this for a competition. She's not in it for bragging rights. She doesn't care if her trophies, or if she even has any trophies, if they're hanging up on a wall somewhere. It's not who she is. And so, yeah, she walked away with his axe. She could have easily just turned around and started this fight again, which she probably would have won, given how skilled we see her as a fighter. I forget the name of the move that she did there. It's the Black Widow move, where you spin around, you get your legs around somebody's head, you flip them over. There's actually a name for that maneuver, and I can't remember what it is. So yeah, she takes off. She just leaves. And when we meet her with the next hunter, again, we get to see how skilled she really is and how adaptive she is. Because I don't want to step on your feet here. I don't know if you want to lead into it.
That's basically the next scene. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it.
Yeah.
She and Leorn fight each other, and hats off to Leorn for continuing to fight after his lower arm gets chopped off. He does like a flip kick, and you see the blood just go whee everywhere as he's continuing to fight. And Elsa, she does take a good blow here.
Yeah.
She does get hit in the leg pretty hard at this point, but she's able to roll over, grab the missing arm, which had the hand crossbow attached to it, and then fires that at Leorn.
Yeah.
And killing him with his own weapon.
And well, the interesting bit about that is that wound that she gave him, she shoots him through the lower jaw, right?
Yes.
So it goes up into his mouth. But he's still very much alive and in pain. She then has to grab him and cover his mouth so that he does not alert their position to anybody else.
Right.
Which I thought was...
Yeah, Jovan comes in and is like searching for her. And yeah, she just has to have Leorn on top of her. She's holding the mouth and basically letting him bleed out on top of her. So even though she doesn't want to kill, she will, and she will be ruthless about it.
Yep. Yeah.
When she has to. So yeah, get more of her character here with these fights. And I love fight scenes that illustrate character like that.
Yeah.
That show you who the character is through how they fight and the decisions they make.
Yeah. She has that exchange in the beginning with Verussa about not keeping up with your father's training. And she said, well, I didn't keep up with his training.
His training. Yeah. Exactly.
So I thought, again, a nice little piece of character development. Nothing is spelled out for you. You experience it, organically.
But then we cut back to Jack, who finally finds Man-Thing. And they did such an amazing job with this. It's mostly puppetry. It's, Man-Thing is not a digital effect most of the time. They had a full-on physical Man-Thing there, and they did an amazing job translating that character to the screen.
In my opinion, it is one of, if not the best comic to screen translations. It's perfect. I could not imagine that character looking any better. I mean it, and I still love that character. I've loved that character for decades. I even occasionally I'll rewatch the 2005 movie, I think.
Yeah.
I do so begrudgingly, but I will watch it because I do love the character, even though that's not really the character, but it's close enough for me, or it was at the time. I loved every single second that character was on screen. I could not have imagined them doing it better than that.
So in this case, I'd say you're the expert here. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about Man-Thing's comic book history?
Well, unfortunately, the comic book history is, in my opinion, it's very generic. It started out very generic. It was very much, if you know anything about the Swamp Thing, it's a very similar kind of origin story. Ted Sallis was working on in this case, it was a super soldier serum derivative. And in true comic book fashion, somebody was trying to get their hands on it. And so he was running away and he injected himself with the serum. It was the only one that existed at the time. He injected himself with the serum and then ended up in a swamp and then became, through supernatural forces, became Man-Thing.
I think in the comics portrayed much more bestial than he's shown here. I don't think he really recognizes himself as Ted anymore. The narration seems like he just has kind of the last vestiges of his human personality deep in there, but that he is more plant than man.
Are you speaking in the movie in Werewolf by Night,
in
or
the comics?
In the comics? Yeah.
Because in the show, if you say Ted, he's like, yeah, that's me.
Yep.
But in the comics, it's much more. They always have these narration boxes because Man-Thing doesn't speak at all, and they always kind of say things like the creature recognizes the human in front of him as something that he used to be long ago. You know, it's always these very flowery phrases about how he was once a man and has just the slight remembrance of being a man, but isn't that anymore.
Well, the thing that I thought they really were able to get across, because there's always been a melancholy nature to the Man-Thing. Ever since I can remember, there's always been an inherent sadness to the character that they were able to translate without speech.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that credit goes directly to the artists that were illustrating him, because you have essentially this character that looks like a cabbage and a carrot put together. It's very hard to make this, to make this thing emote. And they were able to do that on a panel. They were able to give it this personality. Unfortunately for the character, the personality was largely that of sadness, because, like you said, it recognizes that this man, this person, this woman, this child was something he used to belong to, but not anymore. But that's about as far as the recollection ever went. Whereas other characters who have been in that situation remember fully who they used to be. They're just not, like Ben Grimm, the Thing, remembers that he was once Ben Grimm.
Or Swamp Thing.
Or Swamp Thing. Exactly. Alec Holland retained, until they changed the character, Alec Holland remembered himself being Alec Holland. And so to only have a piece of that knowledge, to know that you were something but can't remember what or why, it's a very sad way to find yourself, or to find a loved one, or to find even a character on a page. It's truly a remarkable thing that the character lasted as long as it did, because kids aren't reading comic books to be sad about things. There was in the newspaper, there was a comic strip called For Better or For Worse, and it was a very long running comic strip where the characters on the page are actually aging in real time.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to love this comic strip, reading it in the newspaper, until one day the dog died. They killed the dog Farley in this comic strip, and I was like, I'm never reading this again. I don't want it. It's horrible. And I still remember that. And anyway, a character that is based in sadness, although that wasn't always the case, it's very hard to find a connection. It's very hard for people to stay in, to want to be invested.
Mm-hmm.
But the character is as strong as ever. I mean, it was never a mainstream character, but
no.
Hopefully this movie will give it a little bit of a push. It's always been one of my favorite characters. But to be fair, and I don't know why this is, I grew up in New York. I love anything swamp based. I just love the idea of the back bayous and the swamps and, cypress trees and mangroves growing up out of the water. And so there's just something about that aesthetic that I just truly, truly love. And so it resonated with me. Like I was able to sort of like really just invest myself in it. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know what that
you
is.
Always want what you can't have, right?
I guess. I couldn't tell you where that ever came from, but yeah, truly just one of the best comic to screen translations I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. And I love the relationship here between Jack and Ted.
Yeah.
You can tell immediately that these are basically longtime friends who just always have each other's back, even though both of them are constantly getting into trouble that they can't quite get out of on their own. So yeah, it is very much that Laurel and Hardy, Crosby and Hope, Abbott and Costello, you can tell that they are a pair that belong together.
Yep, absolutely. And you can tell that, they were able to translate this genuine in terms of a cinematic quality, but genuine affection for one another. These are two people who
mm-hmm.
They will do anything for one another.
Yeah. And even though Man-Thing never talks, he has real emotion to his grunts and groans. There's a moment later that I'll call out where he basically says words even though he doesn't.
Yeah, I think I know the scene you're talking about.
Unfortunately, their reunion is interrupted by Azarel, who chases Jack into the tomb.
Yeah.
And this is where Jack and Elsa get to really interact and have some nice character moments between them. And we learn a little bit of their backstories as Jack helps Elsa with her leg wound. And yeah, we finally get the line that we've been referencing many times of, "I'm not that type of hunter."
Yeah.
And he adds on, "at least not like those esbirros out there," which I had to look it up. Esbirros has multiple meanings in Spanish. It can mean henchman or minion, but I think the definition the translation he's probably going for here is killer.
Okay.
He's drawing a line between the hunters who kill and himself.
That's a good catch. I remember hearing the line, but it didn't resonate enough with me to sort of look it up. I just took it as dialogue. So that great catch.
Oh, thank you. It's one of the advantages of watching with the subtitles on is you see a word that is outside of your first language and you're like, let's look that up. What does that mean? I mean, I can get it from context, but let's find out an exact translation.
Cool.
And Jack and Elsa have a nice talk about each of their families. Which is kind of one of the things about the Marvel Universe, like you were saying earlier, but the difference between Marvel and DC is you get these very human relationships. You get, She-Hulk calls it out in the last episode of her show. You get a lot of daddy issues. And Elsa definitely has daddy issues, as we learn here.
Yep.
But Jack, he talks more about found family than blood family here, as he's saying that they're like, even though they're a pain in the ass that you have to come out and rescue every now and then, they're still the ones who are always there for you.
Yeah.
But the family talk reminds Elsa about her crazy Aunt Frances, who apparently was buried with keys and weapons just in case she rose from the dead, as she expected she was going to.
In her words, she needed an exit strategy.
Exactly. And that grappling hook like weapon will come back and be helpful a number of times in the rest of the show as well.
Yeah. That grappling hook, again, going back to the storytellers wanting you to stay within a specific time frame, not a single one of these hunters is armed with an AK-47. Not one of them has anything resembling modern technology. The closest we come is at the very end.
The guards with like the taser kind of stabs.
You have you have that. That's one of those moments where, you realize that this is all present day.
Mm-hmm.
But even the Bloodstone family is not wielding any modern weaponry. It's like a musket, and there's, I'm surprised they're not beating each other with clubs. It's just very.
Oh, right. Verussa has that kind of shotgun looking thing, but yeah, it's a really old, classic looking shotgun rather than an AK-47 or some sort of automatic weapon.
Yeah. And I think the addition of the guards with the tasers, while it might seem anachronistic, works in the reality of their world, that you would, if you guys are hunting monsters, you probably need somebody, lackeys or henchmen or whatever, with something that's a little bit more punchy than a blade and a grappling hook. You'd want something with more protection. So, having armed guards in body armor and helmets and night vision goggles and whatever else with actual tasers makes sense in this world. Although they're the pawns in this big game of chess that they're all playing. When there's danger, send them out, but otherwise keep them to the corners and don't let them be seen, especially in this particular narrative.
Yeah. There's probably some sort of honor or tradition that they are holding up by using only older weapons.
Yeah, this seems like a very tradition-based society. Everything is
definitely.
Yeah, everything's based on some sort of ceremony, some sort of tradition. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so now that they have a way out, they come up with a plan for Jack to blow the wall while Elsa brings the monster to him. And this is the first time we actually get on screen a reference to Man-Thing being named Ted.
Yeah, call him Ted.
Her reaction is, Ted? All right.
I think that also leads into his specific power set, which we're not really told about. We're just more or less shown, but it's coming up right in a second here. Yeah,
I just want to get the other slapsticky moment there of Jack saying, "Hey, how do you turn this thing on?"
Yeah.
And accidentally turns the explosive on, and they're like, well, oh shit.
Exactly.
Run off in their different ways. And yeah, Elsa runs into Jovan here, and then Man-Thing bursts in, and we learn Man-Thing's power.
Yeah, which is, he who knows fear burns at the Man-Thing's touch. However, part of why I think Jack instructed Elsa to treat him like a friend was because in the comics, it's not really just he who knows fear. Man-Thing senses evil. He can sense the presence of evil.
Yeah.
And that is part of that whole burning thing. It's very much like the penance stare for the Ghost Rider. And so I think in Jack telling Elsa to treat him like an old friend was to sort of almost protect her against that whole sensing evil bit, because we never really at no point do we ever get an explanation for what is happening when Man-Thing grabs these people, why they're suddenly bursting into flames.
But no one ever says the words, whosoever knows fear burns at the Man-Thing's touch.
And it's funny because that line is very much a product of the comic book industry, in that it's very much like Green Lantern's oath. It's very much like who gets to wield Thor's hammer. There's always, it's almost like an exposition. It's like, this is why this happens.
It's Man-Thing's catchphrase. It's the equivalent of it's clobbering time, but it's always told by the narrator rather than the character himself.
It's funny because, and again, I've said this a bunch of times, but and you can figure this out, but like, I don't like being force fed information. I can't, it drives me insane when something happens and there's really no real reason for it. And I could give you examples through any genre of movie. Like, for instance, I was just rewatching the movie Dogma recently, which I love. I absolutely love Dogma. And there's a scene where a character turns on the air conditioning. And in order for the audience to understand that the air conditioning was on, it wasn't enough for the character to say it. You had to have little ribbons connected to the air vent that were blowing out so that you as the viewer would see that the air conditioning was on. It's completely unnecessary, but it's a thing that you have to have, because how many people have little ribbons connected to their air conditioner? It's just not a thing people do. And so it's a way to visually represent what the characters are talking about. In modern comic book movies, it drives me insane every time Professor X, any version of Professor X, is on screen and he's using his powers. He's got to put his fingers to his temple on his head. Drives me up a wall. I can't stand seeing that scene. And it happens every single solitary time. And even growing up, being a big Ghost Rider fan, in every issue of Ghost Rider where he uses his penance stare, he's got to tell the villain he's about to use his penance stare. Like, just do it. Just do the thing. Don't enough.
Yeah.
Like, and so, the fact that the Man-Thing can't actually say, fear, you're about to get burned, is quite refreshing. It's nice that he's not saying it before he's just doing it. He's just, he appears out of the
he's
shadows
not doing it. Jack doesn't explain it at any point. It's just, that's what happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Man-Thing grabs you, you burn up.
And we, as a viewer, if you're not familiar with the character, we are as surprised as the person it's happening to. We are as surprised as the hunters that are getting burned, which is great. It's a great reaction, both as the viewer and to watch it happen on screen.
And it was a great effect too.
Yeah.
I think, again, the fact that it's in black and white rather than color probably makes the special effects a little bit easier. But the burning of Jovan there, his death, was really well done.
Yeah, the black and white is far more forgiving, which is good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We get a little bit more of the slapstick with Jack trying to get the explosive to work, which I watched this a few times, and every time he threw it at the wall and it just went dink. I was cracking up. But he figures out, okay, just set it down on the crack in the wall. The wall blows and Ted goes free.
I like that he just goes free without any fanfare. He just gets up to the wall and just goes. Like, there's nothing.
Just keeps running.
Yeah.
Elsa's able to grab the bloodstone off of him with her little grappling hook that she borrowed from Aunt Frances. And he just gives a little bit of a triumphant roar and runs off. One would assume at this point never to be seen again.
Yep.
Unfortunately, the rest of the crew arrives just after Jack had tried to pick up the bloodstone, and it explodes.
Yeah, unfortunately, it turns out that the bloodstone reacts to anybody that's a monster.
Yeah.
I wonder where that distinction lies. Like, supernatural monster? What if you're a guy that just does terrible things?
I would guess that it probably reacts to the magic inside you in some way.
Yeah, I think so too.
Which makes you wonder, can Doctor Strange pick it up? Are witches not allowed to pick it up? Where do you draw the line of what is, it's like you said, but just on a different scale.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the line between who is a monster and who is not?
Yeah, exactly. Because, I mean, we very quickly find out that Ted, Man-Thing, is not in fact a monster. I mean, physically, yes, but not a monster. So, yeah. And maybe that's why when Jack touches it, it explodes and knocks him unconscious. Ted was able to, it just weakened him. They said it, it was, but he was still fully conscious and still, ambulatory.
Yeah. And, we didn't see the bloodstone being attached to Ted.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there was some sort of initial reaction when it first was attached, and then once it stayed attached, then it just had this weakening effect.
Well, we do hear the roar of.
We do hear the roar. Yeah. So, there obviously is some sort of painful moment when it first gets attached.
Yeah.
And there could have been some sort of wound or something. But for Jack, it is a very immediate loud explosion that knocks him and everyone else back.
Yep.
And then the guards and the other hunters show up with Verussa, and Verussa's like, "Oh, you're a monster too. Interesting." And so Jack and Elsa get knocked out, and we cut to Jack waking up in a cage with Elsa already awake. And apparently Jack has systems in place to prevent him from hurting people. He doesn't want to be a monster in that definition of the word. He's not a killer.
Well, we established right out of the gate that he is a traditional werewolf, meaning he will only change with a full moon, which was something that was originally part of the character and then eventually abandoned. You know, they became more shapeshifters than they were werewolves. They could change whenever. It just so happened that they changed into werewolves, you know. And so by keeping with the traditional lore, you know, very much a Lon Chaney Jr. Wolfman kind of thing, I was immediately curious if all the other rules applied. Will silver bullets take him down? That kind of thing. Because, you know, it's funny, there's a moment when he is talking about how he's not specifically a monster, where he acts very canine. He starts to scratch the back of his neck with his fingers, and he's yeah. And so his transformation is clearly not a concern to him because he doesn't realize the powers of the Bloodstone at the time. He's just like, yeah, we got plenty of time, 5 days out from the full moon. But I was curious to know if all the other mythology pertained to this version of Werewolf by Night. Silver bullets, was he himself bitten by a werewolf? Would any of that come into play? Because once he changes, he's very, very powerful. I mean, he's really powerful, not invincible, but very, very powerful. And so, yeah, he, you know, he's very unconcerned about the change until Elsa tells him that the Bloodstone can change him in 5 minutes rather than 5 days or whatever it is.
5 seconds.
Yeah, 5 seconds. And so that's when he starts his contingency plan. He starts smelling her to try to remember her scent. And he says,
yeah, not creepy at all when a guy comes up to a woman and starts smelling her.
Truthfully, after everything that's been going on, that's probably the least creepy thing that's happened that night.
Fair enough.
I mean, you know, she came face to face with, 12 feet of lettuce, just shortly before this. And so he's trying to remember her scent, and he's honest with her. He's like, it worked once before. Let's see what happens. And and then go ahead. I'll let you continue the story.
Well, Verussa shows up to bring the wolf out with the Bloodstone, and it's a very old school transformation. We get a little bit of CGI with the hands becoming claws, but the way it's done after that first tiny second or two of transformation, just to kind of tell the audience what's happening, then the rest of it is done in the shadows with his silhouette and only seeing Elsa's reaction.
And that was done in camera. That was not it's not a digital effect, and it's not a cartoon. That was actually done in camera with silhouetting, which is astounding.
Oh, really?
Yep.
I didn't know that.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah, that is really well done. Yeah, I love when they use old school practical effects as much as they can.
I was genuinely surprised when I found out how much of this was done practically. The last time I can remember a movie doing this much, obviously on a much bigger scale, this much practical effects and staying away from CGI was Bram Stoker's Dracula, where everything was a practical effect or done in camera, with the exception of 2 shots that were done digitally, but everything else, I mean, go back and watch that movie now and realize that everything was done either on set or in camera. That's amazing.
Yeah, I know the model work for like the trains and yeah.
So anyway, the transformation begins. There's a lot of smoke.
Yeah.
We cut out, and the camera pans up to the cage, and we see that Jack's broken out. And we're as surprised that it was that easy for him to get out as the reveal to the guards and everyone else in that room, who are like, oh my God, this guy just...
Well, first, before he even escapes, he pulls Verussa in.
Yes.
She got too close.
Yeah.
And, he starts pulling her arm through the cage bars.
And that close up on her eyes, the shot is a direct lift, and I can't remember where it was taken from, what movie it was taken from, but and it's not one specific movie. It was that action shot was repeated several times throughout several different movies, mostly Hammer movies, and usually it's a frame stop, like they'll, and it's done in trailers a lot too, where the camera will zoom in on somebody's eye, they're scared, and then there's a frame
screaming
stop. Right.
and then the frame just freezes.
Right. So that was a great little homage, and I was happy to see that the character wasn't immediately killed off, because I thought that's what was going to happen. I thought she would be the first to die, and I'm glad that wasn't the case. She gets released. Like did they zap him? Is that why
the guards start tasing him,
that's
that's what causes like the smoke and stuff.
Right.
And that's when he escapes through the top of the cage.
Yeah.
And after he escapes, we get our first full-on shot of the Werewolf by Night.
Yeah.
The first full makeup shot of Jack in full werewolf regalia.
Yeah. Now
what did you think of his look compared to classic films, to his look from the comics?
Okay, so
what did you think there?
If I have any gripes or complaints about the show, it's that one specific thing. So the original Werewolf by Night was a direct homage to Lon Chaney Jr. in The Wolfman. Okay, I mean, they were almost identical. So for this, they were obviously going for that look. They were going for the original Jack Russell look.
And really quick, we just should point out the joke of his name.
Yes. Yeah, that we're not making fun of the character. It's not an indictment. Jack Russell, the dog.
Yeah.
So I loved that look in the comics. I love the look of the Lon Chaney Jr. Universal Wolfman. And I appreciated that they went with this look over the look that became popular in the 80s, where it was extended features, long snout, long ears, long claws and talons, and haunched legs, the whole bit.
More wolf than man.
More wolf. And it became popular with the movie The Howling. I believe that was one of the first times that version of werewolves made it on screen. I could be wrong, but at least in popular culture, I think that's where it first made its presence known.
It's hard to say, like The Howling, American Werewolf in London, they were like right around they were filming at nearly the same time.
Yeah, and whereas American Werewolf in London went for a more traditional wolf-looking creature, because it walked around on four legs and it was more canine. The Howling went for bipedal werewolves. They just happen to be very, very big. And both movies feature amazing practical effects transformations. Just absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Just beautiful. Rick Baker on American Werewolf in London. To this day, I can watch that transformation and be astounded by it. And the same thing with The Howling. The Howling, not as technically savvy, only because it's done in the dark. And so it does cover up a lot of it. Whereas American Werewolf by American Werewolf by Night,
American Werewolf by Night,
done completely in bright light. Everything is right there on the screen, and it, it's just absolutely beautiful. But anyway, I just felt that for this design, they could have gone just a little bit further. It doesn't ruin it for me at all. It doesn't diminish the experience. I just would have liked to have seen them. It's like they got 70% there. They just could have gone a little bit more to make him less man and more wolf. It reminded me, there's a movie called Werewolf of London with Henry Hull playing the werewolf creature. Very similar. The wolf character, the creature, was very human looking. His face came through very, very much in the makeup, which, again, it's just a choice. It's really just a design choice. For me, though, my preference was always more the Lon Chaney Jr. look, or one of the best on-screen werewolves of that era was Oliver Reed as Curse of the Werewolf, which was a Hammer movie. Just a beautiful, absolutely beautiful design. I just wish they had gone just a little bit more. I wish they pushed that makeup just a little bit more and made him more of a traditional sort of wolfman werewolf character. Aside from that, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I loved that the makeup he was wearing, the face makeup that he had.
I was just going to point that out. That's one detail I loved on the character, was that the makeup stayed.
Yep. I thought that was great. I have a feeling that we're going to find out later on what that means, what the significance of that makeup is?
Well, he mentions it in the meeting with Jovan.
He does.
He says that it is to honor his ancestors.
That's what he tells Jovan. I have a feeling that's going to not turn out to be true. I don't think he was giving any of these people any true information, which led me to believe that he was in that meeting under false pretenses. Like, I think that's why that's why I believe maybe he took somebody's identity to get in there. But I did like that even as the werewolf, you can see it was still on his face. And I thought that was a really, really nice detail. And the movement of the character I thought was great. And this is always historically almost traditionally with werewolves and wolfmen, their movements don't match their look. They're not as lithe or nimble or agile or as quick as what they're meant to look like. And one of the first times I saw a humanoid, like a human looking werewolf character that was as nimble as you would imagine these characters to be, because back in the Universal days, these characters just looked like men and they just acted like men and they walked like men and they had the same gait as a man.
Right.
The first time I saw that adjusted was the Jack Nicholson movie Wolf, where they made him, they made him more just agile and nimble and fast and quick. And you got a real sense of terror from this is something that you would genuinely be afraid of. And so the body posture and the movement and the way they had him react was great, jumping around and just flailing his arms and the chaos that ensued and the carnage. It's just one of those little details that I thought was great. The choreography of that character was beautiful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I loved him leaping around during this fight from wall to wall and trophy to trophy as he's trying to avoid the shots from the guards.
Yeah.
And we get a nice fight scene here between Werewolf by Night and Elsa on one side, and then all of the other hunters on the other side. And the hunters get taken down hard.
They are quickly dispatched. And again, it speaks to the sheer power of this character. Also to Elsa, who's part of the fight at this point. She's she's engaged.
I mean, she may not have trained with Ulysses anymore, but apparently wherever she got her training, she learned quick, because she does some really cool moves there and chopping people's throats.
And thankfully, not only is the black and white an homage, but it allowed them to get away with quite a bit, because there's some carnage here and there's some gruesome carnage. Definitely. Especially for Disney Plus, especially for Marvel. It's there on screen. It's not, doesn't happen off screen.
It's there on the lens. You mentioned it earlier, and it's in this scene right here. We get that blood splatter on the camera lens that blurs out a lot of the action at that moment.
Well, that isn't actually
makes it a very visceral.
Yeah, and that's an interesting scene, because there was an opportunity for Jack to escape. The door, it was wide open for him to just walk out, and he doesn't. He turns around and he goes back. So this is an animal at this point, and it's a trapped animal. Well, it was trapped and now it's not, but it's not leaving, which I thought was great too, because again, the door was open. It could have just walked out and it didn't. So I thought that was a really kind of cool little thing. He's like, nope, I'm not done with you yet. And he takes and he doesn't leave until the job's done. Just a brilliantly choreographed scene. Really well done.
Yeah. Michael Giacchino here is not quite a first-time director, but this is definitely his first major project as a director.
Yeah.
And he does a great job. You can tell he really loved those horror movies and loves the modern action as well, because you really did not get these kind of fights in those classic movies from the 30s and 40s. You really didn't get good action fights until, I think, maybe the 90s or the 2000s in American cinema.
Yeah.
It's amazing when you look back at the 80s and earlier, and the fight scenes, the fight choreography, such as it is in these movies, and just how static and boring it is compared to the way people are moving around and fighting in modern movies. It's just such a stark difference.
Well, And again, going back to this creature moving the way you would think a hybrid wolfman would actually move.
Mhm.
If you go back, I forget the year, there was Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. And it's I think, I'm not, if I remember correctly, it's Bela Lugosi as the Frankenstein monster and it's Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman. But there, there's the big battle at the end between the two monsters. And I mean, you're just looking at two grown men hugging each other for the most part. I mean, in terms of
exactly, yeah,
it is it's so clunky and so. I mean, it's got all the charm in the world. It's a charming movie, depending on your definition of the word charm. But I'm sure for the time, people were just thrilled. They were, oh my God, look at them going at it. It's these two monsters and they're fighting. But you watch that now, and it's like watching the bottom of the barrel, like high school gymnasium wrestling kind of show where, the wrestlers are way past their prime. They're working for $25 and a sandwich, but it's clunky. It's slow and it's clunky.
Yeah.
And you're right. Even in action movies, the fight scenes are not this fluid. They're not this agile. And even the wire work in this movie, when he's jumping from trophy to trophy, doesn't look like standard wire work. And maybe it's because of how it was shot. Maybe it has something to do with the black and white, but you can see wire, you can tell wire work when it happens. I mean, it looks like wire work. And we just accept it and we just say, okay, but you get, there's a sense of weight to this character. It doesn't seem like he's just floating in air. And even the parts that are clearly CGI, which is one that's coming up in this story that I won't ruin, there's still weight to it. There's still a good amount of heft. You get the sense that this has really just happened. And that is always a problem with characters that are completely CGI'd.
Yeah.
You don't get the sense that they're actually there. Your mind is allowing you to, the process of suspended disbelief. But like at no point do you really believe that these characters are on screen or that the actor is working against something. Yeah, I never got that sense here at all. I felt these things were there, and again, most of this was practical, but there's a scene coming up next that was digitally added, but it didn't feel digital, which was great.
Yeah, agreed. I think that having the practical effect there for most of the shoot helps the visual effects team with reference.
Yes.
In order to help them make it feel like it's there. When you have shots that you can look back at and say, okay, this is how he acted when he did this. This is what his body moved like at that moment. I can recreate something similar to that for this moment when he appears and make it look similar enough to get a realistic or a grounded performance out of the visual effects.
Yeah. Just getting back to one quick thing. I just wanted to your point about, having stand-ins and having actors have reference points, because for those that don't know, when there's a CGI character on screen, more often than not, there is an actor behind there. And even if it's a large character, there's eye line levels where the actor that's on
they'll
screen,
put a rig on them that gives, that puts like a fake head 2 feet above the actor's head so that the actor that they're working with knows where to look.
Exactly. And there are good examples of this, and then there are not so great examples of this. And I had mentioned to you earlier that I really enjoyed your deep dive on She-Hulk, and I love that show. I thought it was great. I thought it was everything that I had wanted out of a She-Hulk show. I love the fact that it was a lawyer drama, a lawyer comedy. Like, I just loved it. The only thing I did not like was the inconsistency in the special effects. You could tell where they had character models already developed. Like when Mark Ruffalo and the Hulk were on screen, you could tell that those character models already existed, and all they needed to do was sort of plug them in and have them operate in this scenario. And I just, there was a lot of inconsistency in the Jennifer Walters character, almost from episode to episode. And at no point did I ever get the sense that she was actually there. Like, the character felt too light to me in the way it moved, in the way it operated, with the exception of the Daredevil episode, the main Daredevil episode. I thought I thought that was great. I really did. But there were just a lot of instances where I just I didn't believe that this character was really interacting. And I saw there's a lot of behind the scenes footage of our stunt double.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so somebody was in fact there. But for whatever reason, I maybe they just didn't have the budget, maybe whatever. And it didn't ruin the show for me by any stretch. But it was just one of those instances that I didn't really buy that this character was that there was something physical in this scene. But this Werewolf by Night and the scene coming up and all that happened afterwards, I never felt that, not even for a moment. Like I bought into it hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah. Well, continuing the fight here, Verussa uses the Bloodstone to keep Jack at bay, but Elsa, having killed the last of the hunters, grabs the grappling hook weapon once more and hits Verussa in the back and just takes her down. Just on the ground in seconds. She is out of the fight, we think. And things calm down. Elsa's able to get the stone and start checking on Jack. And Jack, the werewolf leaps to attack her.
Mm-hmm. And again, it shows the fluidity of that movement, because he gets up and he's got that great standard Werewolf by Night pose that's taken directly from the comics. The one arm back, the knee bent. I mean, it's almost like the Spider-Man pose, the traditional Spider-Man pose. This is the Werewolf by Night pose, and it's taken directly from the comics.
It's the werewolf superhero landing.
Exactly. It's the werewolf superhero landing. But it looks great. It looks fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
That you could frame that shot. You could put it up on your wall and frame it. It looks that good.
Mm-hmm. But fortunately, the scent trick works a second time.
Yep.
And, that moment where she just kind of puts her hand up to his face, it's a very tender but still suspenseful moment.
Mm-hmm.
As you wonder whether he's going to attack or not. It's the Beauty and the Beast kind of moment where they make a connection, and Jack runs out. But then here comes the moment that I think you've been referring to with the effects. Verussa did survive the grappling hook to the back and aims her gun, just screaming at Elsa all of the hatred and vitriol that she's been storing up for this moment.
But what she's yelling is, again, about tradition. It's about the tradition of the Bloodstone, which I think is important to these characters. It's important to this family. It shows you how important, like, even in the face of all of this, this is what she chooses to yell about,
Yeah, is that you're a disgrace.
Yeah.
You helped monsters, which makes you a monster, basically. But then the real monster drops in.
quite and, literally drops in right through the roof.
Oh, yeah. And the shot there of her burning up and Man-Thing throwing her at the coffin, and then Ulysses' head dropping and rolling right into the camera view was just so gorgeous, so well done.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that the director just saw it in his head, like, this is exactly what I want it to look like, and he got it perfectly from his head to our screen.
Yeah, and the composition of the shot where Man-Thing actually drops in behind her, the way that he had the camera positioned so that it's still far away. You're not, because he could have easily have cut that shot to being a close-up and having it just happen behind her. And right. You would have gotten this almost like an earthquake kind of effect. The way he's got this camera positioned so far away, and you're looking down this hallway and you see her, she's almost part of the background, but yet there's another layer when he drops down, shows even though we're aware of how big Man-Thing is, it shows how powerful this creature is, and the scope of this thing. I mean, and we're already well familiar with his size, but I think establishing, like, having this as a long shot was such a great choice, because you get everything. You get everything in this one shot. The camera never moves, and it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And then we cut to the close-up where he grabs her and she burns and tosses whatever is left into Ulysses' coffin. And what was interesting about that, when Ulysses' body breaks apart because she gets tossed into his coffin and his body basically dismantles.
Yeah.
We see that, we get to see a little bit of the robotic part that was keeping his head
the
in place.
mechanism.
Yeah, the little mechanism. I thought that was a cute little, a nice little, detail. Somebody, like I said, somebody was paying attention, and I thought that was great.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. All that stuff involving Ulysses at the beginning, and now here calling it back at the end was well done. And we talked about it a little bit before. The moment here where Elsa and Ted get their last interaction, where Elsa says, "He went that way."
Yeah.
And Man-Thing growls, "Thank you."
Yeah. But
yeah, because it's not words, but there is nothing else he could have said at that moment. In what you hear "thank you."
Yeah. But before that, before he even says thank you, he more or less asks her, well, where'd he go? Because he kind of has his palms up and he shrugs his shoulders, and she's like, "Oh yeah, he went that way." Like, I thought that was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. That with nothing, I mean, no words, very, very, very little motion, they conveyed everything. They gave you everything. And it was pitch perfect. And then he grumbles, grunts, "Thank you," and off he goes. And here's where everything sort of comes to that almost, I don't want to call it storybook, but it comes to that sort of softer conclusion.
Yes.
Well, first we have, I forget the name of the butler character.
I don't think he ever got a name on screen. I just referred to him as manservant.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. Does he? I'm looking at IMDb here. Okay. His name is Billy Swan. I don't think it's ever said on screen.
Oh, okay.
Because I would remember that. So, manservant Billy Swan.
Yeah, so he comes out of hiding, and he
and says, "Oh, I'm so glad you're now my mistress. Yeah. Go ahead, tell me what to do. I'm here to serve."
Yep. She tells him to start by cleaning all this up. And and I like that little hand wave away. Like, it's just like, yeah, you deal with this now. My story is complete. So this is the rest of this is on you. She sits down, and slowly everything fades into color, and I thought that was great. And it's done to Somewhere Over the Rainbow, which a little heavy-handed, but fine.
A little on the nose. Yeah. I mean, probably the most famous black and white to color transition ever.
Exactly.
Is from Wizard of Oz. And so calling back to that in a very obvious way. But here it works.
It absolutely works. It absolutely works. And in fact, I really don't think there's anything in this movie that doesn't work. At no point did I think like this was unnecessary, or they could have trimmed 5 minutes out of this. Like, I thought, again, I really thought they gave you exactly what you needed and nothing else. I don't think this is a piece of furniture that did not come with extra parts. You know what I mean? Like, there are no extra screws.
But it also wasn't missing anything either.
No.
It had everything you needed. Yeah.
Yep.
It was perfect.
Yeah. And then we get a scene that doesn't really, the end scene. Well, I don't know that it didn't add anything narratively, but it was a beautiful way to close it out.
What Giacchino said was that this had the tone of the post-credits scene.
Oh, absolutely.
And so instead of having an actual post-credit scene, he wanted that floral "the end," that very classic shot of the end on the sky. And so he didn't want to put in a post-credit scene, but he still wanted to have that kind of feel to it. And so that's why this scene is here before the credits hit.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense because it does feel very much like a post-credit scene, but there are so many nice little touches to this. So let's just get into the scene that
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
talking about. We
Jack wakes up in this kind of makeshift camp.
Mhm.
My favorite detail of this scene is that Ted is playing solitaire.
I like that he's playing solitaire, but I also love the fact that Ted made fresh pressed coffee because he
Okay.
not only does he hand him a cup of coffee that's fresh, but
Yeah.
you see on the ground the hand pressed coffee thing that he used. He's taking
Okay.
That
he
means that
has a French press.
that means this character they are traveling around with a French press coffee maker, a bag of coffee beans supposedly, and he's making French press coffee. And so I loved that detail. I love the fact that there's an acoustic guitar, the fact that they're probably sitting around a campfire playing music. There's a
Yeah.
payphone for some reason. Like there's just all these
and
things.
the phonograph from the maze.
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And then there's just the exchange between the two of them, where you get a little bit more of the sense of history that has transpired between them. What we don't get is that moment where they're like, hey, remember last year when I saved you from the alligators in the Okefenokee and blah, like there's none of that. We just know between what is said that they have a long loving history between one another, and it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect.
Yeah. Who rescues who? They rescue each other.
Yeah. And
they
and even in color, and this whole scene is now in color. It's in full color. Holy God, does the man thing look great?
Amazing.
Detail
the eyes on him.
I love the mushrooms on the shoulder. I mean,
yes,
everything is incredible.
Yeah, this one is full puppetry. I mean, there might be some mild CGI enhancement, but if you look at the behind the scenes, there is a full-sized man-thing creature there, and the detail on it is astounding and so well translated from the comic to the screen.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I was looking at the character sketches. I was looking at the renderings. I was comparing it to what was on screen. I can't think of a single thing I would have done differently. I mean, I couldn't even have imagined coming up with something this good. It's everything that you could ask for from this character. It looks great. It moves great. Sounds great. It really is. It has quickly it almost immediately became my favorite MCU character. I'm sure there's going to be more of this character. What I hope they don't do, I'd love to see this character stay almost standalone. I don't need to see Ant-Man having witty banter with this character. You know what I mean? Like
well, here's a question. Would you like him to connect to the nexus of all things?
So the short answer to that is no. Me personally, I would prefer if they didn't explore that. That being said, I'm sure that's what they're going to do. I'm positive of it. I'm not positive of it, but I mean, with the way the MCU is being structured now, with everything being multiversal, especially now with the inclusion of Kang, I'm fairly certain they're going to introduce this element. And if they do introduce the element of Nexus of all realities, I don't see how they could do it without the character, or why they would even bother doing it without the character. If they're going to do it, I'm glad that they introduced Man-Thing in its own format so that we have this version now.
Okay.
One of the things I disliked immensely, among 100 other things, with Thor: Love and Thunder is how easily they introduced the concept of eternity. This massive cosmic being was this one note flat nothing in this movie. And in my opinion, much like they did with Surtur in the last one in Ragnarok, this character that is so rich and so deep and has all of this history was almost reduced to this just throwaway character that they'll likely never put on screen again. And in the mythology of Marvel and Marvel Comics, especially with these characters, they are so vital to their individual stories and timelines and narratives and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to be reduced to these just nothing, on screen for a minute. And they were basically MacGuffins. You know what I mean? They were reduced to a plot device. I would hate to see that happen with a character like Man-Thing. And again, a lot of this has to do with my own personal preference in that I love these Swamp characters, and I was heartbroken when they canceled the revamped Swamp Thing show on DC.
Oh yeah, that was a great show.
I thought it was fantastic, and I was so heartbroken when they didn't even finish the series. They cut it an episode short, and then that's the end of it. And so I would hate to see this character get sidelined in that way and used as just a plot device for somebody else. I think the character has enough going for it where it can. I don't know that it needs its own franchise. I don't think I need to see a trio of Man-Thing movies, much in the same way that I don't really want, nor do I need to see a franchise of Ghost Rider movies. I think some of these characters work best in smaller formats. Not everything needs to be a summer blockbuster release.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the great thing about Disney Plus is that you can do these television shows, you can do these special presentations, and you can find the format that fits the character.
Exactly. If Man-Thing pops up once a year in a Halloween special, great. Keep the integrity of I just want to keep the integrity of the character. And these are characters I just don't want to get bored of. You know what I mean? I don't want to see them do mundane, like have them run out of things to do and eventually launch them into space because we just don't know what else to do with these characters. And you know what I mean? Like I just keep them, integral to their small little world. And I think they'll be just fine. Getting back to Werewolf by Night, I didn't think there was anything that didn't work in this show. I really truly believe that. Again, the only problem I had with it was I just wish they had gone a little bit further with the werewolf makeup. Aside from that, I have no complaints, none.
Yeah, and that's such a minor bit that it's really difficult to find anything to complain about. And I really loved this show, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk about it for this episode, this, since it's releasing on October 30th, I thought let's do something Halloween related. And this was the perfect thing to discuss. And I really appreciate you finding the time to come on and talk with me about it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Where can listeners find you if they want to get more Michael Versandi in their life?
Well, okay, so that's an interesting question. Michael Versandi is let's call it my professional name. Most of the stuff I do is under Michael V as in Victor, EE. I do have a spirituality and mindfulness podcast that I run. It's called The Radical Humanist. You can look it up if you want to. However, I am in the process of sort of revamping the format on it. I'm just a general goofball online. I just do a lot of goofy. I really am. I'm just your general run of the mill nerd, geek. You could find me on Instagram. You could find me on Facebook. Just look under Michael V as in Victor, E as in Edward, E as in Edward. So yeah, man, this has been great. I really appreciate you having me on. This was a lot of fun. I love talking about this stuff.
I appreciate you volunteering.
Yeah, man. Anytime you need somebody to chat geeky stuff with, let me know. I'm around. It was great.
All right. And with that, we wrap up this deep dive. It's been nearly 3 months since the show was on its usual schedule of a new episode every other week, as opposed to every week. And so I'll be taking a very needed break next week, with listener questions being answered again next episode. If you'd like to be the person whose question is answered, all you have to do is email me at welcometogeektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can go to the website, welcome to, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com, and click the Submit a Question link, and simply leave the email field blank to leave your comments anonymously. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcometogeektown or Twitter @geektownpodcast. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, come join the Patreon at patreon.com/welcometogeektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show so we can all tell them, "Welcome to Geektown, population, us." Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All of their sound clips are the copyrighted material of their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.